All right. Pallet Rock City Inside the Paint Show is coming up. And, of course, Clay Ferraro, Ira Winderman are getting ready. There they are. Boys, how are you doing this morning?
You know what? Still a little bit busy, but I think with so much Omar Yurtseven going on with the Heat right now, that I think we'll have time to talk about a few other players also. Look, once you have the Turkish terror, everything else is tertiary. So, as a matter of fact, I'm going to make Clay say that 5 times fast at the top of the show when we get into our Pallet Rock City Miami Heat show. But you know what, it's sort of everything you expect from the Miami Heat. Pat Riley doesn't stand pat. We can debate and will debate for the next hour about the moves, but this is a team that constantly is in motion, and God bless them, may not be the ultimate contender, but they try. This isn't the Marlins constantly selling their future forward.
All right, so are you sure we're going to see FTX on their jerseys and not Geritol? I'm just wondering. Just saying. I mean, the Lakers on the West Coast should be the Geritol representatives because they're even older. Yeah. And then the Heat also. I mean, any concerns, gentlemen, that we've got a lot of guys coming to the arena in walkers?
You know what? I'll defer to Clay on this so he can talk his way out of it.
No, not at all. Look, I think you can't deny that is the concern with this team, that at some point key players are going to break down. I mean, look, they're older than the Brooklyn Nets certainly are, and key players broke down for them last year in the playoffs. And so, I think there is always that risk. And yet I think what the Heat have done, and Ira already alluded to this, is they've made themselves a contender, and I think that you need everything to go together and everything to kind of fall in the right way like it did in 2020 in order to make a real run. But at least you put yourself in that spot again. And they certainly wouldn't have been in that spot had they kept the team. You know what? I forget that. That's how I felt until we saw the Turkish terror last night. Now I know that everything is tertiary, as Ira said.
Oh, look at you! Look at you with the alliteration.
Although, gentlemen,
you stole my joke.
By the way, the screwed up part about the NBA is old usually wins.
That's true.
Well,
that's true.
Usually veterans are the ones that have success deep into the playoffs. That's the screwed up part. It's you got to get there in one piece. But if you can get there in one piece, usually the guys with experience are the ones that usually win, actually.
That was one of my questions for Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com today, and someone said, are the Heat trying to build the oldest team? And I'm saying, no, they can't catch the Lakers. That ship has sailed, And you know what? And if a team with LeBron James and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook is willing to play that game, then, guys, I think there is some merit to playing that game also, as long as you have enough depth. So I think as much as we're going to talk about today on our show about what the Heat have, there has to be more by the signing period on Friday. There is room for more. There is Pat Riley. There is Andy Ellisberg. There is hope. And if not, there's ample Geritol. Although, at this generation, do you even think they know what Geritol is? Are we doing old man radio here?
Yeah, no, we are doing old man radio because they have no idea the joke in Geritol. You're right. I am kind of dating myself.
All right, so let's put it this way. There should be ample blue pills, and we'll leave it that way instead, gentlemen.
Right. Exactly. That's what we'll do. All right, so tell the folks what you got coming up here over the next hour.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about that. And I think what's interesting about this team is two things. Number one, I felt like they went away from their identity a bit last year. And I think it's pretty clear that in this offseason, they have reestablished that identity as the toughest, meanest, nastiest group of guys in the NBA. And I think that's important. And number two, I think that they clearly surveyed the landscape of the Eastern Conference, and they pointed to the top two teams and said, what do we need to do to beat those two teams? And so I think, look, you can argue whether or not going all in on a group of older guys was the wise thing to do, especially long term. And yet I think given what's going on around the league, they did the best they could with what was available.
Right. There was no youth movement. There wasn't a young superstar that was ready to come over.
Exactly.
Nor did they have the ammo to acquire
100%.
a young superstar, because it's going to take you 5 first-rounders or what. Look at what you had to pay for Drew Holiday.
Exactly.
He doesn't have anything like that. So if you're going to pay for something like Drew, or even better than Drew, like Bradley Beal, the offers are going to be way better than Miami could ever offer. So you hit on it. They really went down the only path they could probably do in order to improve and get back to their identity, which is a great move. So coming up next hour, it's Inside the Paint. Ira Winderman, Clay Ferraro, next. There's many ways to support our program, from subscribing and liking the show to visiting our terrific sponsors. Another way is using Cash App. If you would like to donate to the show and help us grow, download Cash App and search Cash Big O Show. That's Cash Big O Show. We appreciate your support as we continue to build the best sports show on the planet for South Florida sports fans. Support the Big O Show by using Cash App and donate to Cash Big O Show. Thank you for your incredibly loyal support.
Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available, from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends. When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Beliefs expressed on the following program by the host, guests, or callers are not necessarily the opinions of FantasyXS.com, Media Group Inc. ownership, management, sponsors, or website. Time for an hour of hardcore hoops with the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. There's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Let's get to the show basketball fans crave. Let's get inside the paint.
What's going on, guys? Inside the Paint here on the Big O Radio Show. Clay Ferraro here alongside Ira Winderman. And, Ira, we're going to talk pretty much 99.9% Heat news on the show today. But we do have some breaking news to tell you off the top. Kemba Walker has agreed to a buyout with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and he is going to sign with the New York Knicks. So, from like a basketball perspective, not a Heat perspective, but from a basketball perspective, I think that's kind of cool because kind of the legend of Kemba Walker began at that Big East tournament. Obviously, basketball people knew him long before that, but that Big East tournament with UConn. So kind of returning to MSG where it all started for him. And so we could talk throughout the show about the teams in the Eastern Conference that are going to contend and if this puts the Knicks a little closer to being in that group. But,
sure.
I think you would agree we have plenty of Heat stuff to talk about. And you said you've been a little busy the last couple of days, huh?
You know what? It just seems like every time you could walk away, boom, there's another Twitter bomb, there's another call from an agent, another text from an agent. And that's sort of what you expected, Clay. We knew after the Heat were swept 4-0 by the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round, they weren't good enough. We know when that happens, Pat Riley, Andy Ellisberg, Adam Simon, the Heat front office, they get into action. They did get into action. They had to get into action. They had to mix things up. And we knew what was lurking, and that was Kyle Lowry. And that was even before the trading deadline. And at the time of the trading deadline, when the Heat wouldn't give up Duncan Robinson or Tyler Hero, who remain on the roster right now, we're somewhat reluctant with Precious Achiuwa, who is going to Toronto or be part of that deal also. So when you look at that situation, you say to yourself, okay, there's going to be major change because there's going to be Kyle Lowry. And then they've continued to move from there, some out of necessity, some out of need. And like we said in the join before when we talked to Big O coming into our show, there has to be more also. Because as you pointed out right there, with Kemba Walker and the Knicks, the churn doesn't stop. You can't be settled. You always have to look for what could come next. We know Goran Dragic is going to be on the move again after this Kyle Lowry trade, which means some other team will have someone shake loose. So this is not the end. The free agency did not end for the Heat on Monday with Kyle Lowry. It did not end for the Heat Tuesday with Markieff Morris. This will be an ongoing process, at least 4 roster spots to fill out, some maneuvering available there also. So we're sort of not at the starting gate, but we're hardly at the finish line.
Yeah, so plenty of more work left to be done. And I think Pat Riley and Adam Stein and Andy Ellisberg would agree with that. And yet, let's kind of break down what they've done to this point. And the number one thing that I kind of took away from this whole thing, Ira, was the Heat have gone back to their original identity from 2 years ago, building around Jimmy Butler, but also building a group of nasty, mean guys that when it gets down to crunch time, you want to have the toughest group of guys, if not the most talented. Because when you surveyed the landscape of the Eastern Conference, there was nothing that they could do to become the most talented. They were not going to become as talented as the Brooklyn Nets. Nobody is. They were not going to become as talented even as the Milwaukee Bucks. So I think you could make the case that pure talent-wise, the Atlanta Hawks would have been tough to catch from the Heat. Yet again, that's a debate.
I might disagree there, but okay.
But what I would say is that the Heat finally have that thing that they can lean on again. And I think in many ways last year they lost that. And you could argue there are plenty of reasons why. I think losing Jay Crowder was a big part of that. You had the reports last year that he and Jimmy Butler would kind of go at it in practice and that Jimmy kind of needed somebody to push back on him. You now have that with Kyle Lowry coming in, somebody who's not only a really good friend of his, but also somebody who isn't going to take any stuff and somebody who's known as a leader across the league. You bring in a PJ Tucker, somebody who is the ultimate tough guy around the league, and somebody who, as we saw in their playoff series against the Brooklyn Nets, nobody's going to hold down Kevin Durant for a long time. Nobody's going to stop him. But PJ Tucker at least made life difficult for him in many ways during that series. And they reached out. Hey, they even reached out to Bobby Portis. So it also said to me, they were looking at the Milwaukee Bucks and saying, all right, who's going to shake loose from there? Who would shake loose from the champs that we can kind of identify as guys who would fit within our identity, the toughness, the team play, all of that. So, and then going out and adding a Markieff Morris yesterday when you knew that they were going to have to build this toughness and this identity and add a 4. I just thought that on the whole, I thought they did a good job of reestablishing that identity.
Yeah, Clay, it's interesting. The point you made there is you could make an argument in recent years that the Heat mantra of toughest, hardest working, best condition, and all that wasn't really the Heat team. They were a run and gun team. They become an offensive-minded team, so they moved away from that. I think it's going to be really interesting this year when I watch you do the sports on Local 10, and you go, the Heat won another gritty game tonight, 86-83. There's not a lot of offense on this team in an offensive league. To your point, when you look at the Nets, of course the Nets are better. But now you have a PJ Tucker to defend Kevin Durant, a Jimmy Butler to defend James Harden, you have a Kyle Lowry to defend Kyrie Irving. You have a chance. When you play the Bucks, you have, again, PJ Tucker to defend Giannis Antetokounmpo. You have Jimmy Butler and Chris Middleton. You have Kyle Lowry now and Drew Holiday. You at least have the matchups. This is going to be a team that's going to have to play, what does Eric Spoelstra say, sort of, in the sludge, in the mud, in the gutter. That's who they are. This is the Heat of Mourning and P.J. Brown. This is Riley's Knicks of Oakley and Mason and Starks and that kind of toughness. So I don't think it'll be easy on the eyes necessarily, but I do think it'll be easier in the win column.
And this is what I love, too. It's Pat Riley's swan song, and he's doing it his way. He's not – you're right. I mean, this is an offensive league. The league has changed, and it's not what it was back in the mid-'90s. And I feel like Pat Riley kind of looked at this, and by the way, it's also Jimmy Butler's way, but I feel like he kind of looked at this and he said, all right, I've done things your way. I've done things the way of the new NBA. I've kind of gone along with the pace and space that Eric Spoelstra has. And I do still think there's going to be a big part of that. I do still think they're going to want to get stops and get out and run because, frankly, in the half-court offense, they're not going to be able to match a lot of those teams. But I love that, assuming this is it for Pat Riley, assuming this is the last core that he puts together, he's basically saying, yeah, I may not be able to do it your way and compete with those guys, But I'm going back to my way, the old school mid-90s Knicks, make things really tough, play in the mud. And so I think, and we love storylines in this business. And so what I like is that you're going to have that contrasting style with the Heat and the rest of the league. And if I just love this idea, Ira. I love this idea. I know. I'm not going to go out and put any money on the Heat to win the championship. But just imagine if they find a way to win this whole thing. Could you imagine Pat Riley looking at the rest of the league and saying, I did things my way and went against you guys? I just think that's great.
Yeah, he might be able to say it, but I don't think he'll be able to say it. And I think we need to sort of add perspective. You pointed it out right there, Clay, at the top of the show. Not only is it about the Nets, not only is it about the Bucks, but you also have an Atlanta Hawks team. Today they re-signed John Collins. He got his bag of money, his $125 million. He gambled on himself and he won. Trae Young got his extension. The Hawks aren't going anywhere. And the questions I might have had about the Knicks, as you mentioned at the top of the show, Kemba Walker gives them that solidifying force. I think he needs to find his place again, but I think there is still one more chance for him also. So, Clay, let's look at the East. Let's look at the Nets on top. Let's look at what we talked about the Bucks. Let's look at the Knicks and the Hawks we talked about. Clay, you and I haven't even talked about the Philadelphia 76ers yet. And whether it's Ben Simmons coming back or whether it's them adding someone else, again, that's another team right there. I think the Heat could put themselves in the mix. I'm not sure you can put the Heat top 3, which means you're still possibly looking at one and done in the playoffs unless it all falls into place.
What is Philly doing? What are they even? Somebody said this the other day, and it's right. I think getting the 1 seed could have been the worst thing that happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how can you go through the playoffs like they did and see that Ben Simmons is in many ways unplayable, at least on one end of the floor at the end of ball games, and then you're asking teams for 5 first-round picks for him? Like, with his contract, they should be giving teams 4 to 5 first-round picks.
Except for this fact. They still have Joel Embiid, who is arguably, with Nikola Jokic, the best big man in the league. They still have Tobias Harris, who is underrated because he doesn't play the beautiful game, but he's very efficient. Mm-hmm. So they either will have Ben Simmons, or more to the point, they'll have something for Ben Simmons. Now, it might not be the haul of Damian Lillard. Might be a CJ McCollum, but they will have another player in place there. They were good last year. They have good depth. And Seth Curry, that trade was a steal for Josh Richardson when they made that last year. So what I'm saying is there's still quality teams with the Heat. The goal, Clay, and I think you'd agree, is you want at least home court in the first round. So when you look at the East, if you're talking about the Nets and you're talking about the Bucks and you're talking about the Hawks and you're talking about the Knicks and you're talking about the 76ers, those 5 teams I just mentioned, are you talking about another number 6 finish? And again, Clay, they're coming back with the play-in tournament this year. If you don't finish top 6, you can be 1 and done or 2 and done with that pre-playoff round also. So the Heat, I still think, are on the cusp, maybe of something special, like you mentioned, and Riley getting another parade, or the cusp of seeing how they do against the Bulls in the play-in round.
It doesn't bother the whole seeding thing and getting home court advantage doesn't bother me. It's all right. Which teams are going to be hot? Which teams are going to be healthy at the end of the year? And to the ultimate point, I think we can all agree. We can debate how close the Heat are to being where they need to be, and all that. There are 2 teams, and then there's everybody else in the Eastern Conference. I feel like, you can say what you want about Philly. We clearly disagree on where they're heading. Atlanta, I think, happens to be a bit better, and I also feel like the fits there are great. Forget about all of that. Can the Heat compete with those top 2 teams? Have they built a squad they can go out and potentially give those 2 teams a run? And I think they did. And so, wants to talk about how old this team is, and to me, that is the number one concern. And sure. I fully understand that. And I also fully understand that you're locked into this core for the next 3+ years. And so, obviously there are mechanisms to get out if you want to, but, hey, try to trade away a 37-year-old Kyle Lowry on a $30 million contract.
You know what, Clay, I'm going to interrupt you there, and I'm going to disagree. And I think there's been one abject lesson for the NBA in the last 3 years. Any contract is tradable. John Wall's untradeable contract, traded. Russell Westbrook.
What did they trade John Wall? What do they have to attach to it?
They had to attach, well, they took Russell Westbrook back. That's what they had to attach to it. Another bad contract. But Chris Paul, when it wasn't a great contract, when he was a declining player, when he wasn't going anywhere, consistently got moved also from Houston and then from Oklahoma City. So I think the old staple of, once you're locked into this roster, you're locked in, I just don't think that's the case. Now, you might have to take someone else's concern. You might have to add a sweetener. But I don't think you're ever fully locked into a roster because you know what? We all thought the Lakers were locked into a roster. We thought there wasn't another escape hatch, beyond Anthony Davis and LeBron James, but there was. Now, you can argue the remake and remix and what they got and what they didn't, but they were able to change. So I think you can. The one thing I'll say about the Heat, and we're talking about an older team, is this. Age is just chronological. And these are, these are Rodley players. They are best conditioned. Kyle Lowry, has changed his body in recent years. PJ Tucker never shows up out of shape. He'll be fine also with the Heat situation. Markieff Morris has that doggedness. I'm worried about the lack of athleticism. I think you can push through age. I think you can eat right. I think you can sleep right. I think you can condition right. But I don't think you could ever regain that explosion. And Clay, that's my concern, is that when it comes to needing an athletic me against you, mano-a-mano type of score, I don't know if they have that kind of player. I mean, Jimmy Butler still is somewhat differential. Kyle Lowry can do it, but I'm not so sure he's going to do it as a consistent basis like he has previously. Markieff Morris thinks he can do it. Tyler Hero is streaky. That's my concern also. We can talk age, but I'm going to talk as age in terms of athleticism.
All right, I'm checking some of these comments right here, and we're going to get out of this segment really quickly, but some good questions here. By the way, Jonathan, John, Premier, Jay, Arcarillo, Ray, Matthew, Vernon, Tony, thanks, guys, for hanging out with us. We're going to get some of your questions coming up next, and one of these that I really want to tackle, Victor Oladipo, because you're talking about the fact that the athleticism isn't there with this group. Mm-hmm. And clearly, when healthy, he's somebody who would add that. And I also think that he's lurking there because apparently he was chatting with the Bucks a bit last night, but teams aren't breaking the bank to sign him. So we're going to get into the Victor Oladipo situation. We're going to look at some of the ways that they can make this team even better moving forward. And we're going to laugh at each other for nobody else knowing how to use the word Geritol. That's coming up next on Inside the Paint right here on the Big O Radio Show.
Reach out to Ira and Clay. Drop them an email at insidethepaint@yahoo.com. Chime in on the YouTube chat board. You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines. If you're a Miami sports fan, then there's only one store to go to, and that's Caneswear at Miami Fanwear in Davie. They're your one-stop shop for all your inner Miami CF, Canes, Dolphins, Panthers, and Marlins merchandise. They have hats, t-shirts, game day jerseys, and so much more. Located at 2511 South University Drive in Davie, and open 24/7 online at caneswear.com or innermiamiwear.com. Call them at 954-835-5597. Caneswear, the spot where Inner Miami and all Miami sports fans shop.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
Looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Welcome back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro. Let's get back to the guys that just updated their email from Prodigy to AOL. Here's Ira and Clay.
I think we may need to give people our AOL email addresses just so they can that's not a lie. They're not just making fun of us. We actually do have.
But we can tell them also that we do have an inside the paint at yahoo.com email for our listeners also. That's all one word together, inside the paint, the name of our show at yahoo.com. So if you've more modernized, maybe not yet reached the Gmail level, you can go over to yahoo.com and our mailbox and reach us there as well.
Also, feel free to drop some chats right here. You guys have been great with some of these, and I'll be completely honest because I'm just getting used to StreamYard here. I didn't even know these existed. This is really cool. So, C-Dola, Philly will fall apart. Jonathan, I haven't seen the Bulls in a play-in round. Bulls right now, I think have surpassed the Knicks and will be top 5. You know what? I love that core that the Bulls have put together.
That's interesting, Clay, because I think they have a lot of names, a lot of pieces that you could put together. Obviously, they started with the Vucevic deal, but that DeRozan contract and what they gave him. Remember, Clay, how people thought the Heat were going to make a play at their mid-level at $10 million. Instead, you're talking about a $20 million plus contract for DeMar DeRozan. At this, look, they have a lot of pieces now. Zach Collins, interesting player. DeMar DeRozan, unique kind of player. So when you look at what they've done with their additions, I mean, yes, Lonzo Ball, again, a unique player, but a winning player, a championship player, we don't know. To me, that's the kind of team that does get a playoff berth. I agree. I was just throwing that up as a hypothetical with them in the play-in because only 6 teams get in. I'm still not so sure you can put Chicago ahead of, I think you'd agree, you couldn't put them ahead of the Nets. You couldn't put them ahead of the Bucks. Probably not putting them ahead of the Heat, the 76ers, or the Hawks maybe. So you're still talking about after all that money spent and what they did with redoing their roster. I like Patrick Williams a lot also. They're probably still playing for 6, 7, 8 and play-in. I think there's a lot of teams that have spent a lot of money that would like to get rid of the play-in and know at worst they finish 7th or 8th and at least get a best-of-7 playoff series.
Mark Stein had an article yesterday about how the Eastern Conference in many ways has potentially surpassed, when you're talking about top 8, the Western Conference, and that you're no longer making fun of them and calling them the least. We even mentioned Charlotte. I like what they've put together.
Okay.
I think that's a young group of guys. And I'm not saying that they're going to even be top 6, top 7, but I do think that it's a group of guys that's going to get better. So all of that said, Ira, you mentioned off the top here, there's still ways that the Heat can get better. One of the names that's still out there is Victor Oladipo. What are you hearing on Victor Oladipo, and what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are some of those potential options, even outside of Depot, ways that this roster could improve between now and tip-off?
Yeah, Clay, I think that's a really good name you bring up in Victor Oladipo because he's still there. And when I look at this Heat roster, and I think that's why it's a good point of reference from you, I look at this Heat roster and I say to myself this. Where is that, like we mentioned in the previous segment, the dynamic athleticism? Jimmy Butler will work his way to the foul line. Kyle Lowry will bump and bang his way and either step back for the 3 or try to draw contact. Duncan Robinson has to be set up by someone else for a basket. Bam Adebayo, and Clay, we're even seeing this in the Olympics, is still not a go-to player. Even with his salary, he's a complimentary player. If the
Offensively, yes.
Yes, and defensively does it all. If the Heat can make it work to bring back Victor Oladipo, and he just contributes starting in January or February, then like you and I were talking during the crosstalk with Big O, this is a different Heat team in the playoffs. If Victor Oladipo, remember Victor Oladipo that last couple of weeks with the Heat before he went out with his injury?
Yes.
He was at least, like Clay, I think you would agree, intriguing. If the Heat can get back intriguing Victor Oladipo, you know what? That changes my view significantly. And how crazy is that? A player coming off a major surgery on his quadriceps, probably not likely to step on an NBA court with game action January, February, I still think could be a big piece for the Heat. But you know what? Ego's a big thing. and having to take a minimal nominal contract is a tough decision for a guy like Victor Oladipo, who is expecting a heck of a lot more in free agency.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm not sitting here saying that he would take a minimum level contract with the Heat if he would have offers in excess of that elsewhere. But you're going to take the best thing that's available to you. I mean, the one thing that when you're a kid and you're getting into this and you're like, oh, well, why wouldn't this guy take a hometown discount to stay with my team, the team I love? Then you grow up and you get married and you have kids and you're like, okay, now I understand. Like, you got to look out for yourself. And yet, I think all things being equal, Victor Oladipo has made it very clear that he wants to be here. And so, like, if he's choosing a similar salary from Miami versus teams around the league, and he can come and make his name here and potentially, like, I think that's the sort of thing that could sway it in the Heat's favor. So, the possibility with him is you could have an end of game lineup. And again, we're talking about everything coming together. A defensive lineup with Kyle Lowry, Victor Oladipo, Jimmy Butler, one of PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris, probably Tucker down the stretch, and Bam Adebayo. I mean, how are you scoring on that team? And unless you have Kevin Durant.
And I agree with that, Clay, except, and again, the ego is part of the equation. You follow Victor Oladipo on social media. He still holds himself in very high esteem, shall we say, for who he is. So can a Victor Oladipo accept the fact that he's going to be the number 4 on the Miami Heat? In other words, this is, I think we all agree, Jimmy Butler's team. With what they're paying Kyle Lowry right now and all they moved to get him in free agency, he's probably their number 2 now. Bam Adebayo, huge extension, $160 million plus starting this season. He is at worst the number 3. So it's really, that to me is the hard part. There are guys who subjugate their games, guys like Markieff Morris and PJ Tucker, who say, hey, we're complementary players. We want to be that. We're willing. I don't know if I've seen that from Victor Oladipo in Indiana. I don't know if I saw it briefly in his tenure with Houston. And I'm not so sure he didn't come in expecting more here. So, Clay, there's 2 parts to that equation. Number 1, can he accept being that kind of player? And can the Heat talk him into sort of restarting his career from the bottom and building back up? It's a hard thing, but I agree. I think of all the still out there guys for the Heat, or the possibilities, I think even looking around the league, that might be as good as any external name. I agree with you, Clay.
Ray, lunch pail Heat team right now, they'll grind every game. Not sure how far we can go with that. And I think that this gets back to your comment a few minutes ago, Ira, about, where does this team finish as far as seeding in the Eastern Conference? The challenge for this team, especially with the age, is how are you going to manage the minutes as the season goes on? And yes, it's a tough grinding team. And, when you're getting a little tired as the season goes on, you're playing against a bunch of young guys in their 20s and they're able to run and jump over you. It can be hard, I think, as the regular season goes on. So that's where I'm less concerned about where they finish in seeding in the playoff race as I am getting through the regular season, getting to the playoffs, because then when you have more time in between games. So to your point, right? Yes, that's how this team is going to win games. They're going to grind it out. That is a style that is more conducive to winning in the playoffs because you've got more time in between games. Now, the game has still changed to where you do see these teams like Phoenix that are high flying and put a lot of points on the board going far in the playoffs. Milwaukee, man, I mean, yeah, they can grind with you, but I mean, Giannis just threw down 51 points in a closeout game. So, yes, the game has changed. But, Ray, I think you're right. That's how they're going to win games. And that's where I keep falling back on this. Don't get as caught up in how the hot dog is made with this team throughout the regular season. It's what's it going to taste like when you get to the point where it really matters, when you get to the seventh inning.
But you know what, Clay? As they're grinding in the pig lips and the shoulders and all that, and the rest, and trying to come up with something palatable. You know what's really interesting? We've now gone just about half of our show and not mentioned a certain name that I think is very germane to this conversation and important, and that's Tyler Hero. Because if this team does need dynamic scoring, if this team does need youthful athleticism, if this team does need one guy who's not one of the old guys to come off the bench with that 12-point spurt when all seems lost and revitalize, it's Boy Wonder. And how interesting an offseason has this been that this started as the offseason of Tyler Hero. Would the Heat be willing to trade Tyler Hero? Is he going to be part of a package? Will he be back with the team? Now, when you look at this roster, and we put these names together, and I think we're up to 11 right now, I think it really stands out. Number one, he's still here. Number two, he remains their most potent trade chip right now. Not a lot else tradable when you sign players. They can't go anywhere for about 3 months anyway, unless they're included in signing trade. So Tyler Hero is really important because you can throw out your old guys. I don't mean that condescendingly, but I'm saying let's say you throw out, Markieff Morris and Bam Adebayo and Lowry and Duncan Robinson, who's not old, and Jimmy Butler. You could still have vitality off the bench, perhaps with a Tyler Hero, maybe with a KZ Okpala. I'm not as sold. Maybe some others are. But I think Tyler Hero, for a guy who might not have had a place, once they let Kendrick Nunn walk,
right?
Once they had to trade Goran Dragic, he moved up the hierarchy organically anyway. But I think he's an important name for the Heat. So the question I would posit back to you, Clay, is this. Is he more important as a roster player, or is he more important as you're looking to round out this roster as the last remaining potent and viable trade chip?
I would say as a roster player at this point, for this reason, you in many ways have taken away your ability to trade for a player with a big salary. And, because you're going to be hard capped and you're not going to have the ability, when they had Goran Dragic's contract, Andre Iguodala's contract to attach. So basically, the player that you would be, and I'm not Andy Ellisberg, but I'm trying to play him on TV. But the player that you would be having to trade for would have to have a similar contract to Tyler Hero. So how many star-level players would be available on a rookie contract?
I'm going to disagree with you that. I'm going to go over a little salary cap lesson here that took me years to learn.
This is what we do.
What's interesting is they decided not to pick up the team option on Andre Iguodala, but they maintained his bird rights. They actually can throw him in a trade as a salary. It'll be hard because of where they are against the hard cap and the cap. But in theory, they could take Tyler Hero's $4 million contract. And let's say they wanted to get an $8 million player, for example, someone a little more. This is the crazy NBA. They can go back to him and say, hey, Andre, would you mind if for a few minutes we give you a bag of $4 million, trade you to Team X, but then you get to go home with your bag of money because they're going to cut you? I mean, this is the you go back in the NBA, Keith Van Horn, I think got traded twice after he was out of the league and asked to take money just to help facilitate a trade. So the Heat still have those. They can do a sign and trade with Victor Oladipo. They can do a sign and trade with Andre Iguodala. God bless him. They could do a sign and trade with Udonis Haslem, who for all he stands for, I think if anyone put a bag of money in front of Udonis Haslem and said, come on, UD, won't you take this $4 million take a hit for the team? I think UD might and take it back with him to Southwest Ranches. So there are also possibilities. But to your greater point, Clay, I think it's really interesting what you say. Is there a better option right now for the Tyler Hero role for the Heat than Tyler Hero?
And that's when you pose the question, what I'm looking at. And yeah, especially, you can combine all of those contracts and with the cap hold and with the hard. So I do like that you gave us that lesson. I'm going to hit some of these chats. Go some good questions here. Jonathan, the Heat will be a good team. My fear is the lack of offense scares me. And yes, but the lack of offense and having an explosive offensive playmaker and age are a problem. I'll say this in ways that I think you can improve that. Watch some of the videos of Kyle Lowry when he's working with both Pascal Siakam and Serge Ibaka. And Serge Ibaka even went on Twitter and said, oh, Bam's about to have a career year because my guy Kyle's going to get him the ball.
Let the good times roll, quite literally,
Yes. So, yeah, pick and roll. So, to your point about Bam in the Olympics, and I want to talk about this more in the last segment, Bam has the opportunity now to be a true big man. Because you now have a facilitator, you can ask Bam to do more of the things that a true big man can do, kind of play that Serge Ibaka role offensively in some ways. And I think you're hoping his ceiling is higher. But I think he can go back to focusing on that. Because of all the things that Pat Riley said in the State of the Heat address after the season ended, the one that stood out the most to me was him basically calling out Spo for asking Bam Adebayo to do too much, especially offensively. This allows him to go back to being a big man. Less of that.
That's a great point. That playmaking Bam was good enough for what they had. but playmaking Bam doesn't have to be playmaking Bam anymore.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
now Kyle Lowry knows how to play make. Goran Dragic was sort of more in a limited role there, so I agree with that also. I also think Kyle Lowry gives them an end-game option. Remember that one game the Heat won when Bam hit the fadeaway shot against the Nets? It was a game when the Nets went out. They lost Durant, I think, early with an injury.
Yep.
And everyone said, finally, Bam's hitting the game winner. He's stepping forward and doing that. I still think that's going to be the occasional thing. The difference with this Heat roster, Clay, is we talked about how the Heat revamped themselves, is it pretty much was Jimmy Butler or bust at the end of games. Draw a foul, get to the basket, hit a jumper, the ball in his hands. Goran Dragic was differential. Duncan Robinson sometimes wasn't on the court because of his defense. Now you can have two guys there. Now you can have two guys who say, have, like I told Orlando yesterday, can do the Eddie House big whatever you want to call them dance at the end of a game after they hit a shot like that because they have the quote-unquote sack and willingness to do that. You need more than one. That's what we've seen. You need Anthony Davis and LeBron James. You need Durant and you need Harden. You need Giannis, and more importantly, you need Middleton and you need Holiday. The Heat have that now. They have two guys they could throw out on the court at the end of the game to get it done. So a little less pressure in game for Bam Adebayo, but during the game, I think he can examine and explore more of his game, and I think Kyle Lowry will make that easier for him. I agree.
Danny says, who did the Heat lose that provided that much more offense than the people that we're getting this year? And I would say they didn't, but I also think the greater point is that they didn't have enough offense last year either.
Yes, that it was a struggle. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And look, I mean, if you had healthy Goran Dragic from the bubble, then he was the guy during that playoff run. How many clutch shots did he get hit the Milwaukee series, the Boston series, getting into the paint in the Indiana series? I mean, so, but you didn't have that last year. And
well,
so
you know what? There's one name we didn't mention also, and it's funny because there's so much going on that there's so much we skip over. We haven't mentioned the name Kendrick Nunn to this point. And you know what?
And I'm glad you said that. Tony asked about that as well. He says, what happened with him? So, Ira, give some of your intel on that. How did that go down?
Well, first of all, my point I was going to make on Kendrick is he did score. People never gave him quite the credit. So when you're saying, what did the Heat lose? They lost Goran Dragic, but they also lost Kendrick Nunn, who scores more than PJ Tucker, who scores more than Markieff Morris. So you did lose a component there. I've always felt the Heat relationship with Kendrick Nunn, obviously he wasn't the one, that was the problem, is that they always viewed him as good enough, but they never truly valued him. There's two factors in play, Clay. Number one, they knew after 2 years he would become a free agent. They could lose him. They'd have to spend. They weighed that against Tyler Hero, who's still under a rookie scale. This season, Tyler Hero, $4 million. They didn't know that the market would be this low for Kendrick Nunn. So they had to cover themselves by prioritizing. You know this, Clay. You've done some debates with Will Manso on Local 10 on this also. The Kendrick Nunn, Tyler Hero. Is Tyler getting too much? Are the Heat undervaluing Kendrick Nunn? I think the Heat did undervalue him because I think the Heat prioritized. I think you'd agree with this, Clay. Wouldn't you agree that Tyler Hero has a greater upside than Kendrick Nunn?
Sure. I also think there's some reasons why you can look at last year why Tyler took a step back, and you would hope that and I think a lot of it goes back to, frankly, what Riley said Spo did with Bam. I think the point hero experiment, you saw some flashes, but then ultimately it just didn't work. And so I think you have to ask Tyler to go back to being who he was.
Yes.
And just be that instant.
And changes that equation. And the other point about Kendrick Nunn is I don't think he's going to play a lot for the Lakers. I think he really had to take a deal of last resort. One, Russell Westbrook's the starting point guard. Two, people are talking about, they might lose Dennis Schroeder. What are they going to do? Well, LeBron dominates the ball anyway. They have plenty of ball dominators. If Carmelo Anthony plays, he's going to dominate the ball. They might prefer the shooting of Malik Monk or Wayne Ellington now that they added him. So I think Kendrick Nunn, one, was the right player in the right place when he signed with the Heat, but then sort of, and circumstance happens, became the wrong player in the wrong places. Look, nothing wrong with $10 million. He has an option to get out if he has a good first season with the Lakers, but it just didn't fall into place with him. But you know what? When we grade the Heat, Clay, at the end of free agency and the end of the season, not a lot of that grade is going to be on whether they did right or wrong with Kendrick Nunn. There's a lot more important factors there.
Yeah, and to your point about undervaluing him, maybe, and yet relative to the offers that he apparently was getting, maybe not. And he's somebody who, he's instant offense, and yet in many ways, I think I think they viewed him, like you said, as good enough, but also replaceable. And I think if your identity is going to be such that you're going to be this tough team, so they're going to be moving that direction. We're going to move to a break. Coming up after this, I want to get into more of this Bam Adebayo conversation because I feel like in many ways, we're kind of putting all this in the context of Bam being kind of who he was and who maybe we've seen at the Olympics. What is the next step? What does he have to do in order to turn this team from very good to great? We're going to have that and a lot more coming up on Inside the Paint here on Big O Radio Show.
You're listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a good rack? Pallet Rack City. Sports fans love a place with great food, cold drinks, and TVs everywhere. That's why sports fans love Sports Grill and their 7 amazing locations. Check out the Bird Road location at 11481 Southwest 40th Street in the back corner of the West Bird Shopping Center. Sports Grill is also now offering some great employment opportunities. All kinds of positions are now available from kitchen to hosting. Call for more information at 305-485-8845. From wraps to salads to amazingly delicious specialty dishes, Sports Grill is the home to the legendary special grilled wings. Since 1987, Sports Grill, good food, good drink, and good friends.
This is the Big O Show. 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 This is the Big O Show.
There's no need to drive around South Florida wasting valuable time looking for a new or certified pre-owned Acura. Go to the #1 volume sales dealership in the Southeast United States. Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. Purchase with pace and space in a dealership tailored to your needs. From home buying to providing that personal touch. Contact the 2020 Satisfaction Award winner Craig Zinn's Acura of Pembroke Pines. 888-776-5123. That's 888-776-5123. Or visit them at 15601 Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines.
When you need your warehouse looking good while staying efficient, there's only one place to find the finest racks in the business. Pallet Rack City in Hialeah. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. Pallet Rack City is the company you need when you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business. After all, who doesn't love a great rack? Pallet Rack City. 305-424-8547. That's 305-424-8547. If it's hardcore hoops you desire, make sure you subscribe to the Big O Radio Show and never miss an episode of Inside the Paint. Let's get back to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint Show with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro.
Welcome back to Inside the Paint here on the Big O Radio Show. And thanks to all of you guys that have been dropping some comments in the chat here. This is fun. I like kind of getting to this and getting you guys' opinions and answering some of the questions there. And you've really given us some good ideas for the direction of the show. Okay, so before the break, we talked about Bam Adebayo a little bit.
Sure.
And, the thing that stood out to me after the season was Pat Riley basically saying that we got to figure out a way to not ask him to do so much. And I think this does that. Adding a Kyle Lowry does that. And now you're allowed to put Bam in position to be a true big man. Ira, the thing that kind of bothered me a bit with some of the Bam criticism is you can't ask him to be Giannis on one end of the floor and Nikola Jokic on the other. And I think there were some times last year when, especially when Jimmy Butler was out, you asked him to put too much on his plate. And I think Bam is a great player. And I think that, as he says, he's one of one. I think there's an even higher ceiling. But I also think you have to be fair to the player and put him in positions to succeed. Now, you add a Kyle Lowry who, among point guards in the league who are able to get guys the ball in comfortable spots on the pick and roll, you're not going to find 2 or 3 guys better than him. So what does Kyle Lowry do for Bam Adebayo's game to unlock it and potentially turn him into the big man that the Heat need him to be offensively?
Yeah, I don't want to overstate that because I don't know if he's ever going to be an offensive powerhouse. I don't know if he has that game. I don't know if he's not more of a hustle player anyway. And you know what? I don't know if he's a great player or a really good player. And Clay, the reason I say this is I don't know if he's a perennial all-star. He's a guy who's on the cusp of all-stardom in the NBA. So I think when you look at the situation with Bam Adebayo is you just want to see continued growth. We know as a defender he is unique, but maybe is he too unique? So many times you'll see them play that 1-5 point guard center pick and roll. He's out guarding on the side, on the wing with the point guard, and the middle's open, and the Heat don't have a lot of deterrence. Maybe you need to change the system a little bit more to let him be in the paint and be more of a deterrence. Offensively, obviously, he's a pick and roll player, and he's best on the pick and roll when someone can get him on the move. Kyle Lowry can do that. He's had some good moments also playing with Duncan Robinson in the pick and roll there also, and setting up Duncan, spotting up there also. So you have those 2 options. But I think when you look at Bam, until the shot comes around, and remember how proud he was of his midi last year. He was hitting that mid-range shot, and he was feeling good about himself. So you have that as well. I think Bam, until he extends his shot, you mentioned Jokic, and we know he spaces the floor a little bit more. I think he's still going to be a little bit limited dimensionally as an offensive player. This is an outside shooting league. I think you can be a very good center without an outside shot, but I don't think you can be a great center in today's NBA, including even a Rudy Gobert and a game changer. Remember, he was pulled late in playoff games also, unless you have that outside shot as well.
Man of 1,005 Hold says Bam will need a post-up game and to shoot threes. He says 5 attempts per game. Maybe not as many as 5, but I think to your point, he agrees. And
he can. He can.
Yes, he can. And I think that's part of the game. But let's go back to the mid-range. I mean, I'm sitting here watching Kyle Lowry videos, and the number of times that he was able to get Pascal Siakam, Serge Ibaka, and even you go back before that, Marc Gasol. I mean, guys, wide open shots, wide open mid-range shots.
From the elbow, yeah.
Here's the problem. When the playoffs hit, Bam couldn't make those in that Bucks series, and then it got in his head, and he wouldn't even take them. So what does Bam need to do? I agree. He needs to extend that shot. He needs to spend the offseason, hit the corner threes, right? Like the things that Chris Bosh turned out to be such a – I don't think anybody anticipated him taking that lead. So work on those, but be more consistent and develop more confidence with those mid-range shots because – with Kyle Lowry, those are going to be there in spades.
That's a great name, Clay, that you brought up in Chris Bosh. Because if he can emulate that career arc with, honestly, a defensive game far superior to what Chris Bosh presented, even though Chris Bosh also guarded 1 through 5, then I think he's more complete. Hey, it might not be a bad idea to bring Chris Bosh into camp or some private practices.
100%.
You know how we talk for years how you want players to go to Hakeem Olajuwon's big man camp to work for their post moves? I think that's a great point. I think if you can get Bam Adebayo to Chris Bosh's big man camp, that's the role that would fit so well with this roster, what Chris Bosh did. Remember, it took Chris Bosh probably 2 or 3 years as a featured player to take his game outside to when he could make a difference. So I think that's a really good career arc. And again, please do not forget about how young Bam Adebayo is.
Yes.
There is still plenty of growth time there.
So you mentioned Chris Bosh, and you know, sometimes crazy things happen that lead you down that path. I mean, it was when he got hurt during that playoff run, and they basically said, all right, well, you can't do anything. Just go out there and shoot threes while you're trying to get better. And then he comes back, and once it was the Pacers series, when all of a sudden, man, he's hitting those threes. And so it's like, those are the types of things that are going to set him apart. And we know that Bam has worked with Chris Bosh in the past. You know that there's that mutual respect there. You know that Chris Bosh is somebody who is more than willing to help and be a part of this. So all of those things I think can really help this team moving forward. I want to make sure that I'm getting all these chats. Hey, somebody asked about if this is a Don Strock jersey back here. It is not. This was when we were doing these at-home sets. The Dolphins were nice enough to send me a jersey with number 10 for local 10. However, Don Strock is a Virginia Tech legend, so so I will gladly take that.
It's kind of hokey. That's kind of hokey from you, but okay, we'll go ahead.
You know that we had to do that. So okay, let's kind of recap everything we've talked about and big picture. where the Heat are. Oh, somebody asked about Omer Yurtseven. Is he a lock to make the team? I think he's a lock to win MVP within the next 3 years. So,
or within the Sacramento Summer League, at least one of the two. It's interesting though how Omer Yurtseven had a contract from the Heat. The Heat did not pick up that contract at last weekend's deadline. He still remains. He could be signed by any team now, and that does happen, Clay, during Summer League. The Heat have had players who've excelled in Summer League, and boom, someone has stepped in, and taken one of their players. So they might have a decision there.
It happened recently. There was a big man a few years ago.
Willie Reed.
Yes.
The Heat had to deal with Willie Reed, and Willie Reed was dominant, and then Willie Reed was gone.
Yes.
Eventually, he circled back and cycled back to the Heat. So you do have players like that. They can also offer Omer a two-way contract. It's interesting because I spoke to Omer before Summer League, and I said, you know what? They only have one big man under contract, the Bam Adebayo. Your chance is here. And he says, yeah, and I want to seize it. I want to show we struggled with rebounding last year, and in the playoffs, I want to show I can do that. Since I spoke to Omer, they re-upped with Dwayne Dedmon. They brought in Markieff Morris. They brought in PJ Tucker. So I'm not so sure that it might not have to be a two-way for Omer to stay in the Heat's orbit. He's interesting. The one thing we both learned, Clay, over the years, we've seen the Summer League superstar. And the Summer League superstar often fades into the G League or winds up playing over Macedonia. So let's keep perspective also. Now, if he does it again tonight against the Warriors, then all bets are off.
Turkish terror. I love it. All right, let's finish this off lightning round. Let's go through all these signings and give us quick thoughts. Kyle Lowry, overall thought is?
An overpay for a team that needed to overpay. Absolutely will produce, but is under contract through age 38. This might be a case of living in the moment, having to pay for it in the future.
One we haven't even talked about, Jimmy Butler extension.
It's the same thing that's going to happen Friday. Friday at 12:01 a.m. is the earliest that he can extend Jimmy Butler. 4 years, $181 million. Everything I've heard, seemingly everyone else has heard, is that's a done deal again. An overpay for the future to live in the moment. That's sort of one of the benefits and the downsides of having a team president and Pat Riley in his mid-70s. He's living in the moment. What Andy Ellisberg and Adam Simon might have to clean up down the road, leave it to the Arrisons.
Markieff Morris.
I'd love to get excited, and then I looked at the stats from last year, and I looked at games in the playoffs when he couldn't even get on the floor. To me, they realized when they had PJ Tucker's not a 40-minute player. They had to either find a spot starter or someone to share the job. So I would say they signed Markieff Morris as part of a job share. This will be power forward by committee. And Clay, is like that old maxim in football, when you have two quarterbacks, you have none. I'm not so sure when the Heat have two power forwards, they necessarily have their quote-unquote Jay Crowder level answer.
One caveat I'm going to put on that, I was doing a little research from the Lakers side. Apparently, he had some injury stuff last year and never quite came all the way back. So hopefully he turns more into the player that we saw even in the bubble for them, as opposed to what we saw last year. You mentioned him, PJ Tucker.
You know what? I mean, on one hand, you get a guy for 1 year. He can fill a role. He's a tough defender, sort of in that Jay Crowder role, but not as much of an offensive threat. A nice player, not a game-changing player. And the fact that he was upset that Milwaukee did not step forward and go into the luxury tax to keep a championship player, I'm not so sure we're getting a player who as much wants to be here, who is just more upset about not being in Milwaukee. That's going to be an interesting situation to keep an eye on.
Oh, and to me, that makes it even better. I think that, man, you want that sort of attitude. Dwayne Dedmon.
Perfect. I mean, he was perfect when he came in. Clay, what I want to see is this. And Eric Spoelstra, Eric Spoelstra, one of his thoughts when we ask him about starting lineups and about rotations is he always says, you've heard this all the time with your work at Local 10, I'm open to end everything and anything. He always says that. But he hasn't been open to playing two big men together. He didn't do it with Bam Adebayo and Hassan Whiteside. He didn't do it with Dwayne Dedmon and Bam Adebayo, except for short periods. I need to see if that's workable, because if that is workable, then all of a sudden only having PJ Tucker and Markieff Morris works out fine, because you're also going to have Bam and Dedmon minutes. Love Dwayne being back. Really want to see if it's workable at all with Adebayo and Dedmon. And again, that goes back to what you spoke about in the previous segment. Can Bam Adebayo have enough of an outside threat that the spacing can still be there playing alongside a true center?
And finally, Duncan Robinson.
You know what? On the face of it, when you look at $90 million for undrafted player who came out of the G League, you kind of you step back a little, and then you say, you know what? Almost every NBA starter makes $18 million a year. It's not that ridiculous. It's sort of the price. This team needed Duncan Robinson or a Duncan Robinson facsimile. The question now becomes, will Duncan Robinson stay at a level that you don't say, well, we could have gotten Wayne Ellington or Malik Monk or another shooter? He has been that. He's unique to the Heat. You have to pay market value. They knew that deal would get done. So I think in the end of the day, that's a deal they had to do. I don't think a deal with the devil. It's just crazy. 18 million going rate.
You know what I think is funny? We went through, I think, 6 names there. And with every single one, the first thing you did when I said the name was sigh.
And like even because they didn't get that max guy, because they didn't get the sexy guy. When they got Kyle Lowry at 35. Kyle Lowry, even when he was a little chunkier, was sexier at 30. That was when he was sort of in his wheelhouse. So Clay, I would almost ask, except for Duncan Robinson, have any of these players the Heat added, have they gotten him in his wheelhouse, in the prime of his game? That's my concern. Who knows? Maybe the Max Strus and Gabe Vincent signings turn out to be guys in their wheelhouse. But I think that's part of this also.
Yeah, and I also think if you go back to 2006, they did a lot of that, and yet you had Dwayne Wade in his prime. And I think that made everything different. And so I guess I would look at it like this as we start to wrap this thing up. I feel like, yes, you can look at each individual signing, and the first thing you do is sigh because of the age factor and how much money these guys are going to be getting. And yet I also think you have to take it all in the totality of this team went back to finally getting its identity back. And I think that you always need that thing that you can fall back on. If you're the Milwaukee Bucks, you're going to fall back on Giannis. If you're the Brooklyn Nets, you got 3 guys that you can fall back on. The LA Lakers, all of these great teams have something they can fall back on.
Sure.
With the Heat, they're going to have the toughness, the identity, and that's going to be what they late game situations. Now you finally have somebody, as you said earlier, in Kyle Lowry, you can put the ball in his. It's not just Jimmy Butler or bust. But I think that what they've been able to do, in addition to adding somebody in those late game scenarios, in addition to adding some guys who can make life difficult for the better players in the Eastern Conference, is on the whole, you've got your identity back. You're going to be the toughest, meanest, nastiest group of guys in the Eastern Conference. And I think, yes, I'm not sitting here arguing that the talent is going to be on the level of those top teams. But Ira, I feel like we've seen many times in team sports that a lot of having that identity and the whole being greater than the sum of its parts can take you to places that maybe the talent can't.
Well, it's interesting because while we were talking, the Heat just posted its motto for the coming season. And I think it's interesting because the motto is going to be take the under. And I think that's what this team is about. I don't think there's going to be a line on a game this year when you look to the Heat and you look at this situation that you don't say to yourself, hey, this game might not reach 200. That's who they're going to be. So as long as you can sort of align yourself with that, the fact that that's how this team is going to play, the defensive team, the Riley Knicks, like we mentioned earlier, the Oakley, Mason, Starks, Ewing teams, the Alonzo Mourning, PJ Brown, Dan Marley teams that started, Pat Riley really revitalizing this team. They have their identity right now. It's going to be a hell of a challenge for Eric Spoelstra to get points out of this group. It's going to have to be a different player every night. They're going to have to do it more by committee. But yeah, we know who they are. This is not the offseason when they just threw money and made it rain to Deion Waiters and James Johnson and Kelly Olynyk and Wayne Ellington and just, okay, here's a bunch of guys. Go ahead, Spo, make something out of this. Make chicken soup out of chicken feathers. No, they now have grade A chicken cutlets to work with to make something far more tastier in a delicious Filipino delicacy.
There is a world where Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley ride off into the sunset on horses to the Malibu home of Riley, and there's the sunset in the background, and they look back and they say, we did it our way. And I'm not saying there's like even a greater than 5% chance of that happening, but man, what a story it would be if they all put that together. So thanks for hanging out with us. We're going to have a lot more on this coming up next week. And Ira, as you said, there's still more work to be done with this team.
And I'm going to be in Vegas next week at the Butt Crack of Dawn with you on the show instead. So
good luck with that.
Yeah, you know what? I'll see what kind of fashionable pajamas I can show up with.
Well, here's the thing. We know how Ira rolls anyway. He's going to be out at the casino, so he's just going to roll out of the casino, do the show here, and then go to sleep. So that's Ira's just, man, that's just how he rolls out.
Reeking of tobacco and whiskey. Just another Wednesday morning coming up.
All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out here on Inside the Paint. Let's do this again next week right here on the Big O Radio Show.
You've been listening to the Pallet Rack City Inside the Paint program with Ira Winderman and Clay Ferraro, exclusively on the Big O Radio Show. Search Big O Radio Show on most platforms. Subscribe and smash the like button to support Inside the Paint. If you want your warehouse sporting the finest racks in the business, there's only one choice: Pallet Rack City.